Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm actually quite excited to share with you what we've done in the studies that we've been running for quite a few years now, and we are sort of like coming to an end, wrapping up one of the trial. So adaptive platform trial is not always perpetual. They do graduate at some point. And sometimes you do want to see them graduate, actually. So my name is Ly-Mee Yu, and I'm a Deputy Director of the Primary Care Clinical Trials Units in Oxford. There are quite a lot of clinical trials units in Oxford, and this is one of them. And we're basically specialising in primary care. We've got now about 85 of us, so it's a relatively, compared to most of these CTUs in Oxford, in the UK, we're relatively a sort of like a small to medium size clinical trials units. And we are sort of like majority of the people here do actually either work part-time or full-time, depending on what their preferences and their work-life balance. So this is just to sort of like give you a brief. I just realized I don't have my slides with me. Okay. So this is just to give you sort of like a brief overview of our portfolio at the moment, and we have actually been quite busy. It is a very, very busy unit, and basically mainly because somebody have actually mentioned that about academic fundings. We do majority of our trials is actually funded by the NIHR, which is the UK funding board, the biggest funding board in the UK, and various other different smaller funding boards, and as well as Wellcome Trust and MRC. But we do actually have a very, very small number of trials that we're running, which is through a private company or the pharmaceutical companies. So we have been quite busy, and but it's been quite enjoyable. And one of the very unique things, because I actually coming from a secondary care units, running a lot of secondary care trials, and what's the unique thing about the primary care is they do actually go much faster than the primary care. Like if you're running a cancer trial, it takes quite a long time, and you can probably do a lot of other things outside as well, where primary care trials is actually a lot more quicker. I would say a bit more exciting as well. In terms of the platform trials, we actually do have a few platform trials that we're actually running in the CTU, apart from the two largest one that you probably heard during the pandemic. We have the first one, the ALICE trial. The ALICE trial was a platform trial, but it just never managed to get any adaptation or anything. It finishes with 2 arms, and it got published. The ECRO Prime is probably one of the most recent one, and is a EU-funded study, which is under the ECRO, and is also a platform trial. But this is one that's actually specifically looking at more of a late phase 2 or early phase 2 trials, rather than a trial that which is the principal, and the panoramic, which is more of a late phase trials, phase 3, I would call them. And I think that there is still some space for some early design platform trials, but we don't know where that's going to go, because it's a bit more specific. And Prudence is a trial which is also platform trials, looking at the point of care test, comparing the different point of care tests. So it's a bit different. So we are getting a lot more requests about platform trials, and we also sort of like just had funding for another one, which is actually designing a platform trial for study in running in mental health in people with bipolar disorder. So this is pretty much the landscape anyway of how the UK is running. The UK funder is very much into looking at sort of like funding infrastructures, or having maybe a 12 months funding to get people to start off with, to plan a study, rather than to go in and run the study, without any prior knowledge, etc. Platform trials, I think that we all know that, from all the yesterday's and today's talk, that it is very efficient, and I'll put a bit of a caveat on that, so like quotation of efficiency. It is flexible. The aim is actually to answer multiple clinical questions quicker. We're trying to maximize the recruitment, and that is quite true, and reduce the trial setup time. And that's probably, in theory, is true as well. but it doesn't actually shorten any of the modifications or anything during the trial, which is actually take up even much more time than others. So I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about methodology, because you're probably all swamped with a lot of equations yesterday. I mean, even though I'm a statistician, I tend to do a lot of my talks, which is equation free, just to sort of like free up people's mind. And also that it's Friday morning. So what I'm going to talk about is the challenges that we've been facing with running the trials, not just about the a platform trial, but is also running a platform trials during the pandemic, when this is actually our first platform trial in the units that everyone have some exposure of. The previous trial, the Alice trial, is actually running in the EU with our other European partners, so it's quite different. The methodologist that we're involving is probably the same. We've got American consultants to sort of like help us to start off with, etc. And now we're pretty much that we've got our own Bayesian statistician who's working among the whole bunch of frequenters. So I think she's really enjoying that time, I must say. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about all this whole list of things that today. It might be sort of like jumping sort of like in and out. That's just how my brain works, unfortunately. So the examples I'm going to give you is the principal trial, because this is the one which I feel is a bit more classic, and stuff that we learned, we actually managed to also take that to the next trial, which is the panoramic trial. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as well. But this is sort of like mainly about the focus of how we actually did our trial. So during the time of the pandemic, this is when we had the first lockdown, and I was actually looking forward to the lockdown because I thought that I'm going to have a bit more time at home catching up stuff. And then no, we actually got this project landed on our computer saying that we need to get a study going. And I think the government is actually quite interesting, thinking that, we've got a study in the hospital, we've got a vaccine trials, and we need to think about doing something for the community. And that's why hence that we've got this projects that we were asked to sort of like to run, which is called the principal trials. And the trial is actually, you hear a lot more about the recovery and how I think people in the recovery team knows how to wave the flag more than us. Our trial actually, we did actually take only less than 3 weeks to get everything done. And from this beginning of the protocol, drafting the protocol, to the first patient randomized. So it was actually quite quick. Given that our CI Chris Butler was also sort of like suffering with COVID at that time, so it was quite remarkable how we actually managed to achieve that. So this is a study mainly to look at how to reduce hospitalization. So they're trying to prevent people to go into hospitals, and I'll tell you that a bit of a challenge of that as well. So the PICO is sort of like here. We're looking at the high-risk population presenting in primary care within the 14 days since the onset of cough or fever during the time of COVID. This is a much more sort of like a broader inclusion criteria, but there's actually a lot more criteria in it, especially with the age range, everything. But that actually changed over time since the start. Initially, we were looking at over 65, but then we actually over 50, but we actually then changed it to over 18 with anyone with at least one listed comorbidity. So the things always keep changing because of how the clinical presentations, the variants, the vaccinations, and the availability of testing, everything. So that's just keep changing. So we're also keep adapting as well as much as we can. So the first trial the first arm that we started with is hydroxychloroquine, and then we did actually run sort of like adding more arms to it, and other arms did actually also dropped out as well during the study. The control group is the usual care without any of the studied drug. Well, this is what we intended, but when that the intention to treat would be quite different. So the outcome measure, as I said, it was actually initially was the hospitalization or death due to COVID by 28 days. In the very beginning of the pandemic, we were actually based on the event rates and the data coming from China, and it was interesting to see how different it turned out. We've got a lot more, well, a lot less people that actually get admitted to hospital. And it's basically being that in China, once you've got COVID, you go to the hospital. Where in the UK, if you have COVID, you stay at home unless you really need it. And that's why the hospitalization rate was actually quite different. So this is something that you probably need to sort of like figure out as well. It's quite difficult, but it is something that you need to bear in mind using some of the external data to inform, you know, how you're actually going to set up your trials, doing a sample size calculation, etc. So we did actually very quickly that we did move to a co-primary outcome is the time to recovery from randomization by 28 days. This is actually an outcome. We did consult our patient and public involvement to think about what they think, whether this is a sort of like acceptable outcomes. And interestingly, our PPI, one of the PPI said that, to be honest with you, hospitalization is so far down the line. I actually want to know that whether I'm going to go get quick, you know, recover quicker. But unfortunately, I think there was a talk yesterday about this, there's a discrepancy about what people actually want and what the funder or regulator or policymakers want. So, you know, how that your trials get bumped down to the level of evidence because you're trying to be very pragmatic about your trial. And I think that having a time to recovery, which is a self-reported time to recovery, has becoming sort of like that bump down the level of evidence from for other people, the regulatory, not the regulatory, but the policymakers. So the key features of principal trial is that it's an open label, decentralized. I put that word in because it was just happened to be a decentralized clinical trials, not by choice, but it was sort of like the circumstances that made us feel that we would actually need to do the trial remotely. And we ended up sort of like, you know, this is this, and then we realized that this is a term that's they use for you know, this type of study. It's called decentralized clinical trials. We have it has to be rapid recruitment. We're trying to find something as soon as possible. We do actually have some interim analysis with the specific criteria to stop the trial. And then we've got the interim analysis for futility, which we use a sort of like a very tight threshold initially, so that we're not going to throw the drug out. We're trying to find something as much as possible, and we're not want to stop due to futility too soon. But we did actually change that as well, due to the time that when the trial is to a point that you're actually not getting anywhere. So you just have to sort of like think about that you're not going to get anything significant, and neither significant nor futile, then you have to do something about it. And that's what we did. We actually revisited the futility threshold then. Adaptive random, the response adaptive randomization, which is the Barry's favorite. So we actually been recommended in using that. And I think that really makes sense as well, because at that time we feel that we actually wanted something very quick, but that actually has introduced quite a bit of a challenge for us. So this is what we did when we initially set up, you know, within that 14 days. That there was a trial team, and we have a big trial management team. Not that we have a big unit, but we just move people around to do work. So we've got people to do the site initiation, and we've got pretty much the whole trial management team. We're doing site initiations, and then we've got the submission for approval. We've got the contracts and to sort out. So we can't really start running a trial until we've got everything in place with that. We have somebody who actually concentrated and just work on the recruitment. We've got somebody who do the communications. In that it's not just about communicating with participants, but also with sites, with the funders and with the public. So there's quite a lot of other communications issues that we also had as well. And there's also somebody who deals with the NHS England. NHS England is it's what we used to call the NHS Digital, and it's an organization which is under the NHS that would actually hold all the it's a registry data that will have all the patient registry data, and they've proven to be a very, very useful resources for us to help us to run the trials. We have a core team, and I will explain that, a notes review team who actually review the medical notes. And then we actually have the PPI group, and we call it on-site A/B team, which means that they come in as fixed time. I've anyone who actually got COVID, we've got another one as well. So we actually have trying to cover that we're going to have a continuation, that somebody in the trials units would be able to run the trial, continue run the trials. So we've got the clinical team who helps with the preparing for the what we call the intervention specific appendix, which is when you add every single drug to it, then there was going to be appendix in the master protocol, and that's what they do. They write the scientific side of the IMP. Then we've got the safety team, the safety monitoring team, and also the recruitment for which is the clinicians have to do the recruitment consenting participants. The stats, we've got the blinding, unblinding, IT and data, and then we've got the pharmacy as well. So we started off with a sort of like, this is the nurses who started off when we were at the beginning. And you can see that we all have our sort of like follow the rules with the distancing. And we were just simply talking through of how we're actually going to run the trials when there was somebody who started calling, and what do we do? And that's basically, it's the flow that we're trying to work out at that time. And then at the same time, we've got another group who is actually preparing for the master protocol. Initially, it wasn't actually, it was just a very conservative, just like the normal protocol we had. And then it actually gradually it actually turned into a master protocol, because we can't see the point of you just keep amending the protocol, adding everything in. And then you realize that there are some inclusion criteria, it has nothing to do with the other drugs. And that's why that we actually ended up with the ISA as well, which is what pretty much every sort of like all APT is out now doing it in that way, or the master protocol trials we call it. We engage with the sponsor, the HRA, the MHRA, the ethics committee, and pretty much the contract office as soon as we hear that we were actually, and we just pretty much prompt them that we've got a protocol on their way, and we're trying to give them a sort of like a turnaround time that when we actually want to have the trial starts. We were not as fortunate as the recovery team. We were specifically asked for a lot of details, scientific details, to be put in our protocol. So we do actually have a proper sample size calculation, statistical analysis plan, which is actually a bit more, I would say, properly done is the word I would use. We did actually have a lot of phone calls, but it is actually proven that, you know, we did actually manage to get everything start kicking off in 15 days. When it comes to the system developing and the data collection tools, we actually use initially for principal trials, because as everything, it has to be remote. So we've actually put in quite a lot of time designing this. And thanks to our programmer who actually managed to set up something very quickly, and our data team tested very quickly before it goes out. So we've got something which is a platform that would be able to do online screening. Participant will be able to download the consent form. So somebody, last session was mentioned about the consent form being 1 page. I mean, I think we've got a page or two, but majority of stuff we actually put in the patient information sheets rather. So this is what the recommendation that we would be giving to, is that you need to put absolutely everything in the PIS. That is the way that we tend to be doing, not to overwhelm participant at the same time. But I have to say that, the patient information sheet is quite long as well, etc. And we also have a trial partners. We're thinking about the people who are actually being participant. What happens if they're being too ill? If we need somebody to do something for us, and how do we actually, you don't really, if they're very sick, you don't really want them to get on to help, to vote in the questionnaires, that stuff like that. But we did actually manage to get a sort of trial partner to help if we need to have any of the primary outcome information, and that really sort of like proven to be quite useful as well. We have the clinical team to confirm all the eligibility, so not everyone will be able to get into the trial, so we do actually have that bit of the safety net to make sure the trial is still running ethically. We've got the individual link to the daily diary, so the participant will get a link automatically through emails, and they'll be able to do it. But also that we have people on the team that will be able to, to be able to help them to fill that in as well, and able to send emails reminders to them as well. And when it's sort of like the bit about the clinical, I would say the clinical data, the eligibility database have actually been sort of like done through. When the participant press the button, it actually push through something called the sortition, which is our in-house built randomization system. Now, this is a sort of a typical randomization system that you see in any of the trials units. So it doesn't do any of the fancy stuff that you think you would do in adaptive platform trials. It doesn't add or drop any arms, and it doesn't do any RAR. And we started off with 2 treatments. So, and you can actually do multi-arms. So it was quite interesting, and we were thinking about what to do about this platform trials, RAR, etc. But yeah, we did actually manage to get it to do. I've managed to sort of like think of a very cunning way, and it worked. So that was fine. But I probably won't recommend people do this. If you have the resources, do develop what we call a more flexible sort of randomization system that will be able to have that capability. And the other thing which is also interesting is we're thinking about that, the all or none is whether everyone has to sort of like fill in all that, fulfill all the eligibility criteria in order to go into a trial. Then that would be proven to be very inefficient, because what happens if somebody who's actually eligible to have A treatment but not the other one? So we're actually built in with the capability that people who are actually be able to be randomized to say A or B, or say treatment A versus intervention, they can actually go into these different randomization systems. So it automatically triage them to the different randomization systems that will be able to take anyone on who actually have at least some eligibility criteria that will be fulfilled any of the treatment drugs. So that actually worked. So when I did this, when I was talking to the programmer about this, so we only started with 2 treatment arms. So I told him that this is going to be a very fast going pace, so get ready for the next arm. And that's what we did. We get ready for the next arm, so whatever that treatment arm is going to be. So we started off with 1 randomization system, but he actually had built 3 in the background, with a view that there's going to be another trials coming up. When it comes to stats, we have the Berry consultants who actually been giving us quite a lot of advice initially. So you can see that we've actually got quite a big team, the stats team, and we've got the blinding team from Oxford and from the America, but we also have the unblinding team from America and Oxford as well. And we kind of sort of like very clear sort of like a task and what we're going to do. I have to say initially it's actually quite hard to communicate with a bunch of Bayesian. We do actually talk very different in terms of the languages, but we did actually converge, and everyone seems to understand each other finally. But so it was actually a good and nice experience. So the Berry consultants, they actually have done all the simulations beforehand to show us how the trials is going to progress, etc. And all that details is actually all documented in what we call the ADR, the Adaptive Design Report, which you will be able to access all of them if you go to any of our trials publication. We basically have probably about 200 or 300 pages long of supplementary documents that you can actually see absolutely everything there. What we don't have is the code to run the simulation, and we're still waiting for that code from the Berry consultant so that we can archive them later on. And we did the protocol, the SAP, the statistical analysis plan. We initially, again, started with a very conventional way of doing the analysis plan, and then we switched to what we call the master SAP. so that it's sort of like in line and similar the way that how we actually do the master protocol. So we've got the appendices where it's specifically for each treatment intervention as well, so that we will sometimes even have the primary outcome may be different, and we also have support analysis that could be quite different, and that's actually proven it to be quite good, and it's quite flexible in that sense. The interim analysis being done by the Americans using the Bayesian approach. The Oxford team would be preparing the data for the Barry's team, and we do pretty much all the other reporting as well. So this is a study which is actually quite fun, because we've got bits of it is done by a Bayesian way, and we've got bits of it's done by the frequentist way. I was actually quite worried about what the journals were thinking about it, but nobody seems to challenge that. So, which is actually quite good. It does mean that you can actually have both Bayesian and frequentist published in the same paper. So it's more of a happy together. So this is what happened. I'm trying to show you the challenge of the RAR and the open label issue. Okay. So we've got the statisticians, from the UK and the US, and the communications between the UK and the US unblinding statistician is pretty much done between them, and we're all pretty much barred by any of the activities happening. So for me, it's actually quite good, a blessing in disguise. I don't know anything about the trials results, so nobody will ever come to me and ask me, have we got any signals? But I think that what we also have is that the bits about the RAR ratios, because that when you've been sort of like told what the RAR ratio, you kind of sort of like know what's happening. So both the statisticians who's actually processing the data, and also the unblinding team, or even anyone in the team, would not know anything about the RAR ratio, and the only person who actually know is the programmer. So we actually got the members of the SAC team, who are the Barry consultants, who actually worked out what the RARs is, and get just sort of like emailed to the our program who've actually fitted in. As I told you that our program, our randomization system don't do RAR, but we did actually think of a very cunning way, is if we do them in a block of 10, then you would be able to work out if your probability is out of 100, then you would be able to get the allocation right anyway. So that's what we did, and it seems to be, I think, is working. I haven't actually checked all the RAR yet, because we haven't we're actually locking the data today, doing a hot lock today, so we haven't actually seen any of the RAR results. So when it comes to the oversight committees, it does actually, you can see that we do actually have quite a heavy stats presence in the oversight committee, and it does feel like a stats conference every time when we have a data monitoring committee meeting, because it's very unusual that you'll have so many statisticians. But it was quite good, because we have Deborah Ashby, who's our chair of the DMC, who know exactly what she is doing, and she's got heaps of experience. So we've been having them, and this is a kind of sort of like a relationship between the trial management team, the data management team, and the trial steering committee. And I think that for adaptive platform trials, my advice is, it would definitely be good to have a data monitoring committee and the trial steering committee separate, because your trial steering committee will probably be able to give you recommendation without looking at the data, and the DMC actually have seen the data, so their recommendation would probably going to be swayed by what they've seen. And so this is why we've always in our trials, all the trials in the CTU will tend to have sort of like both the DMC and the TSC. So it's just to give a bit more good separations between them when it comes to making a decisions about a treatment. I have to say, it sounds like that, we've made this a perfect formula, everything. Well, every single time when we need to drop an arm due to efficacy or whatever, there's always a confusion. And that's the bits that we're still learning how to make it work better. And it's quite difficult. It did actually prove to be quite challenging, but we're getting there. The most important thing is, wherever you're going to do, write it down in advance what you're going to do. And that's the most important thing, because otherwise you start having the timeline difference of, did they actually see the data? Did they actually review it? Or after they, before they before they make the decision on how to disseminate a results. And that is quite a bit that you probably have to make sure that you bear in mind. When we do the recruitment, we start the recruitment, we actually use sort of like the most sort of like conventional way. We set up a site. We set up about 800 sites, I think, and the GP would actually go and look through the records and see who would actually fit the top level eligibility. And they send out a text and sort of like invitation letters to participant and tell them to take part in a trial, okay? And one of the things we actually learn later on is when you send out a text to a participant, and it depends on which GP practices, they have a limited word count. So we actually realized that some participants have actually, or patients have received text messages but got truncated. So, and then we have to start thinking about reducing it, condensing it, making sure that the link is actually at the top. So whatever got truncated, we still got the link at the top. So that's what we've done. So this is what we've done. The problem is that this is what happened, is that we didn't actually do very well when it comes to the sort of like conventional way of randomizing and recruiting. So we had to think very quickly what we're going to do. And this is what we did. We actually ended up sort of like using different routes of trying to get people to. So instead of sort of like having a trial, what Chris Butler always kept calling it is, instead of having a trials, going to a patient, get the patient to come in themselves and they self-refer. So we have a lot of different routes. So we've got something called the NHS England Pillar 2, which is what you need to sign up when you have a COVID positive. So we've got a list of the participant there from that, and then we can contact them directly. We've got the Zoe app, which is sort of like a symptoms app that's actually developed by King's. We actually have a little what we call a little ad there to say that, you know, if you have a symptoms, you know, you can take part in this trial. And we also have the online screening, and we have say that we put the sort of like into the public and then let people to come and screen if they have any symptoms they think. We also link up with the University of Southampton that they're running also a trial. And we're saying that what we did was that anyone who's actually not eligible for our trials will get referred to their trials and vice versa. And that sort of like helped to generate a bit, small bit, not much, but I think it's still, you know, for us at that time, it's all about every single little things counts. The ambulance service is when the people have wanted to help with some medical advice, and they had to call up, and then that's the bait that we were trying to see whether we would be able to get them sort of like checked whether they're eligible there, but it didn't quite work out. So, and one of the things we also did is to track, you know, this is where sort of like the incidents happening, you know, across the UK. And then we also tracked how we actually do our recruitment, and we actually got anywhere that we feel that we haven't actually quite, you know, reached. And we do the local radio announcement as well, if anyone who actually would like to take part. So this is a very busy graph to show, and our programmer have actually managed to sort of like give a little indicator at the link so that I can actually tease out, you know, where they're actually coming from. You can see in purple is where the initial starts with the recruitment from England, which is what we call the GP sites. And then the very blue bits that you can see is all very coming from the websites. So you know, it's basically just to show you how the timeline, and we look at this pretty much every single week to see, you know, which one is working, which one's not. And the total number of people got screened is at 82,000 during at the time that we 2020 to 2022. When it comes to the eligibility, as I said, you know, the people can actually comment on the screen, you know, go on the screen and also to self-screen themselves whether they're eligible. But there is a next step that we have to get the clinician to agree, you know, to also do the clinical assessment to say whether they're agree that, you know, whether they think that this person is truly eligible or not. And this is what happened when we tried to contact the patients. We have to wait for the queue. You know, they didn't get the information consent form, so they're not giving out any information. There's no answer, everything. So what we did was we actually got the what we call the NHS England, the summary care records. This is actually a database actually used for clinical decisions. So it's not actually specifically, it's actually used, not specifically used for research. If you look at the website, they did actually make it very explicit that the two trials, the principal and the panoramics being used exceptional, that's the exceptional circumstances. But it's actually have proven to be quite useful. It means that we don't need to, we can bypass the patients, the GPs, we can actually do the self-screening, the clinical screening, on site as well if we needed to. And it doesn't have to be a GP site, which we have set only, 800 GP sites. So it, and it's actually quite useful for us. It has actually cut down the screening time, and we can actually screen people on the day that they've have signed up. So it did actually work quite well. But of course, we do need to have a sort of like a contract with them, and that took quite a long time. So this is just to sort of like show you that the randomization distribution by routes, and you can see that majority of people actually coming out from the online screening, which means that I do actually feel that sometimes the patient do actually want to take part in a trial, very much so. And sometimes I feel that they might be overprotected by the GPs themselves or the clinicians, thinking that, that might be too much of a burden. So, it's actually quite nice to know that, there is a different route, and taking it to patient directly, you'll be able to get a better conversion rate and the screening rate. So this is what show you is that we ended up that we've got about over 4,500 GP practices have recruited at least one participant to principal. And this is where you can see the where all the GP practices been scattered around the UK. So I think that it has actually proven to be worked well, even though there was a lot of sleepless night. So when it comes to the IMP delivery, which is like the drug delivery, we thought about using the GP sites, but they weren't actually quite comfortable having the drugs, that they have. And we also think about using the local pharmacy. And unfortunately, they don't really set up. They haven't actually, it's not the way that they set up to do clinical trials. So you need to have a separate clinical trial counter, and they need to have all the capability before they can actually dispense the trial drugs to participants. And so we thought about using our CTU, which is our, just sending out drugs from our CTU directly. And we did actually manage to do that. So we actually have set up a little dispensary, and we did the over labeling ourselves, which we everything complied with the MHRA, and we did actually get the MHRA waiver to do this. And what we did was we got the labels, and we have the pharmacist here who checks everything. We've got a clinician here who's very happy to receive the drugs, but also that who is doing all the labeling. Oh, it wasn't really just him, but it was someone else as well. But they're doing the labeling, and we're trying to fit everything in according to what they comply with the MHRA's requirement. Communication, as already sort of like mentioned before about the communications, about the patients, about the oversights. Restocking of the IMP is an interesting one, because sometimes in the trial management group, when we talk about, is anything about the IMP people want to talk about, and we realize that people start saying that, I think that the budesonide is running out. So we don't say that, because that would give give away, if you're just running out quite quickly, you must be doing quite well with your RAR. So we actually have to say that IMPs is the word for everything. Dissemination of results is also a challenge. And then we also have the communication with the MHRA, the government, and also the funders, especially when we have to change everything. And so this is what happened with the when we did the trial for the azithromycin. The drug actually stopped. We stopped recruiting azithromycin to a panoramic on the 30th of November, and we've managed to get something out, by the 15th of December, which is the medical officers who actually to disseminate this whole information to the rest of the UK to tell them about the results and the recommendation of azithromycin to treat people with COVID. Data linkage has been an issue, but no, data sharing is an issue from the data linkage because we have a very strict data sharing agreement about what we can share and what we can't share. I mean, I was working sort of like having a secondment with the NHS England, have realized that there are things that it's quite difficult, but they are finding the way out as well. They are sort of like very much of a lockdown about data sharing, but they are sort of like trying to sort of like do it better now. And this is what happened, and what I'm saying about the forward thinking is that when we had the hydroxychloroquine paper came out, and the whole of the UK who actually run trials related to hydroxychloroquine got stopped. So on the same day, we did actually manage to switch to azithromycin on the same day when we stopped the hydroxychloroquine. So, you know, again, it's more about trying to think a bit more forward, what might happen. But this is definitely something that we didn't actually thought was going to happen, but it did. And then we had a bereavement from the programmer. So we actually ended up doing some emergency randomization, and that was fun. So we did actually manage to randomize 66 people to the trial, and it was quite a complex system, but it did actually manage to work. And then I also have to do all the trials checking to make sure that everyone's randomized to the right drug, etc. So we are now have what we call a GMP facility because the MHRAs no longer wish to have the the exemptions for that we can actually deliver the drugs. So we have actually applied for a license and has been MHRA inspected, and now our trials unit is, has a facility that will be a capability to send drugs out, which means that will help us in future if we're going to have in-house drug delivery to trials. This is just to show you how all the drugs that we have been tested in principal trials, and I think that it's coming out. So I think again, one of the biggest talk about this, which is the challenges, the statistical challenge, is what should be your analysis population? Should you actually be using all your controls? Should you be using the concurrent control, or should you be using concurrent positive controls? And that's what sort of like, if you look at our paper in details, and that's changes quite a lot. There is a sort of like good reason for that. Wish I could have more time to talk about it in future, but maybe next year. So this is the panoramic, and I'm pleased to say that we've now reached 28,000 people last night. And this is where the difference is that we have actually make changes to. Instead of having a GP site, we have a hubs. So we got a hub and spoke, and that actually proven to be quite good. But again, the majority of the randomization is still coming through central randomizations, the central team. We do have screening, but that depending on, because we're looking at antiviral drugs rather than repurposed drugs. So there's more sort of like red tapes around the screening process by the MHRA. We've got the digital tools. Instead of using the in-house, we actually have built a sort of like external bespoke one single system that worked quite well. The IMP, we have used the pharmaceutical services, but now it's all coming back to in-house again because we've got the license. The other thing is the involving the 4 devolved nations instead of having run it all in England, and that helped in terms of the how we did the recruitment. But again, there's also a complexity of the have to apply for 4 different applications to get the data, the registry data. This is how the sort of like the time that we've managed to recruit 25,793 people within the 5 weeks when we start the trial. The most recruitment that we did was 500 a day, so was actually quite a lot, and it was going a bit frantic, I have to say, but it proved to be working as well. Then this is where all the GP practices that have actually recruited at least one participant to panoramic, and you can see it's pretty much covering the whole of the UK. So, and I'm pleased to say that. I have to say that this is actually proving to be quite good in terms of getting a balance with the socioeconomics index. But we still have an issue about ethnicity, the ethnic distributions. that has to be something different. And it has to be, you know, we need to sort of like find a way to get through and how that's going to work. So that this is a summary that of the trial. We did actually learn a great deal. There's a lot of methodological and practical issues that has changed the way how we run trials now. And I think the adaptive platform trial is not just about the statistical methodologies that we need to think about. And each individual intervention has its own little challenges as well. You do actually think about, you know, what we call forward thinking to make sure that, you know, what's ahead of us. So it has to be the trial team that needs to make sure to be informed about this and think about what could go wrong will go wrong. Okay, thanks very much.